They wanted to take their ideology to people that they view as woefully ignorant, and they needed our help. We need to show them how to treat women. Now, we live in the fruition of the feminist movement, where overwhelmingly women have more rights than men. And so the Afghan people, the Afghan men in particular, were not weak like the Western men who allowed the adoption of this to take a foothold. And now we see, men have no rights. Men lose, custody of their children almost 90% of the time. It's over 50% divorce rate. The vast majority of divorces are committed by women. And the state takes away their children from the men, and we see the rise of single motherhood, right? This is the outcome.
Now to an update, where's a story we've been following in Queens. A man is under arrest hours after triggering an Amber Alert for his 7-year-old daughter. The mother of Jayla Puelo claimed her father took her. According to initial reports, there was a violent confrontation between the parents. Puelo's been charged with attempted rape and menacing, but he's not been charged with the kidnapping because he has joint custody of the child.
And so the Afghan men, learning from the mistakes of Western men, said, we're not going to tolerate this in our nation. Hence why they went to war. And this war went on for the better part of 20 years. Now, prior to this, Afghanistan was in a war against Russia, pushing back communism. And so America sided with Afghanistan, who were pushing back against the Russians. And they funded the Afghan military. Originally, there are multiple tribes, I guess, or cultures, but the ethnic groups that are primarily predominant are the Pashtuns and the Tajiks. And the Tajiks were overwhelmingly the ones who were utilized as soldiers. They were the mighty men in Afghanistan who pushed back the Russian military. Now, the Pashtuns were the vast majority of the culture. You can see that right here. They make up a good almost 50% of the culture, and they're the biggest ethnic group out there. Now, the Taliban are the Pashtuns, right? It's the same people, which is why once America withdrew, the capital fell instantly. Why? Because it's the same people. American soldiers were occupying the land of the Pashtuns and trying to spread democracy. And of course it failed because overwhelmingly the people did not assimilate, which is why immediately when the American soldiers started to withdraw, that the Afghan soldiers didn't fight back, because they're literally the same people. They are literally the soldiers that were supposed, Joe Biden talks about these 300,000 Afghan soldiers. They're literally the Taliban. They are literally the Taliban. America was, they didn't, and they knew this. They knew that they had Pashtun soldiers who were literally spying on the American soldiers, which is why for 20 years they were not able to stamp them out, because they were literally being funded on both ends of the spectrum. And so when America pulled out, they're like, why would we put up a fight? Why would we put up a fight against our own soldiers who have been pushing back against basically a coup? America is basically trying to, which is why you overwhelmingly saw men trying to get on the damn plane. You barely saw any women who were trying to get on the plane. And it's because it was those men who sided with America, and they knew the end result of that was going to be that they were going to be put to death for trying to side with the people who were trying to commit a coup in their own country. And this is what America had been doing for the better part of 20 years. Now, originally, America, in trying to spread democracy, did not want to allow the Tajiks, because the Tajiks did not make up the majority of the country. They made up a minority of the country. And since democracy is mob rule, which is why when the Tajiks were asking America to send them money to help push back against the Russians, and to later on to help push back against the Taliban, they didn't. Because one of the reasons why was because the Tajiks were drug farmers, because nothing really grows. They have a lot of minerals in Afghanistan, but nothing really grows because it's a desert. So what they produce is heroin. And so optically, it did not look good to supply basically drug dealers with weapons. And so they went the route of trying to create unification between the two groups, and it didn't work. And what happened was the Pashtuns ended up wiping out many more of the Tajiks. They kept on assassinating their generals, and so eventually they started weeding out many of the Tajiks, and now you have an overwhelming larger portion of the Pashtuns who make up the vast majority. And so the Pashtuns are the Taliban. So America ended up funding the Taliban, which is why they didn't fight back. Going back to the article, it says that the event was for gender apartheid in Afghanistan, which highlighted the barbaric condition of women living under Taliban rule. It says nowhere, of course, did anyone point out that the Taliban owed its strength, at least in part, to U.S. foreign policy. It says before long, actresses like Susan Sarandon and Meryl Streep signed on and made the issue a cause celebrate. I can't pronounce that word. It says then came September 11th, 2001, and the revelation that the organization behind the attack, Al Qaeda, was holed up in Afghanistan. George W. Bush administration, always looking for justification for war, found just the thing in the feminist majority campaigns. It says by November, First Lady Laura Bush was arguing that the reason for the war was to liberate Afghan women. By November 20th, the leaders of the feminist majority, including El Shmuel and the former head of the National Organization for Women, were attending events at the State Department and meeting with administration officials. In the spring of 2002 issue of Miss Magazine called the invasion a coalition of hope, adding bombs to the feminist toolkit. It says the brand of feminism those women collectively championed is what I call white feminism, meaning that it refuses to consider the role that whiteness and radical privilege play in universalizing white feminist concerns, agendas, and beliefs as those of all feminism and all feminists. Of course, not all feminists who are white feminists. No matter the person's skin color and gender, advocates for an anti-racist, anti-capitalistic feminism is a threat to white feminism. Yet both within and outside the United States government, the white feminists decided that war and occupation were essential to freeing Afghan women. That's why you see all of these, you're going to see a lot of women crying, tearful. It's because for a lot of these individuals, they set up these schools and they basically taught these women to be feminists. And of course, they push back against the patriarchy. But the men didn't. The military men were never going to give up in their pursuit in pushing back against the American military. Because the reality was so that they would look like what we look like today. And what is the fruition of the movement today? Let's look at two recent videos that just sprung up. And we're going to take a look at these. And I want you to listen very carefully because this is what was trying to be promoted in Afghanistan and why the Afghanistan men, the Taliban, pushed back all these years. Why was it that they refused to give up? Why was it just for their country? Was it just for no, it was because they knew what the outcome was going to be, and this is the outcome.
This is what we're not going to do. The cis people have been getting what they want for forever. If you want to call chest feeding breastfeeding, I don't give two shits. But on my platform, where I want to make people from the alphabet mafia more comfortable because I am a part of the LGBTQ plus community, I'm going to continue to say chest feeding. We live in a society where the word breast has been over-sexualized by the men, by the cis men. So for a lot of us, chest feeding just feels less sexualized. But again, there are those who are non-binary and those who go by other pronouns who feel more comfortable with the word chest feeding. I don't give two shits. I don't give two shits. Not one fucking shit. None. I don't give no fucks, no shits.
Right, so you can understand very easily why men, patriarchal men, who have a very strong religious conviction would push back for so long, because this is the fruition of the movement. Now, in terms of the men, this is why you hear stuff about, oh, men shouldn't work out, muscles on men is unattractive, anything you can do, we can do better, etc. And this is what they were pushing for all those years in Afghanistan. And this is another video of what is going on in America today. Now, in this video, the question is, where is the midwife? And I want you to watch this video. This is basically where America is at.
Our family.
Oh, I put it on here.
The baby has been able to latch, but I've not been able to produce any milk. It's okay, because we're gonna supplement the feeding with formula so that my baby's still getting the nutrients that they need, but I'm still feeling hopeful. I appreciate you so much for all your work.
And I appreciate you also, baby. I couldn't have done it without you.
And this is basically what, when you see stuff like this about how the Afghanistan people, the men, they need to be more inclusive. This is what the West is talking about.
It is exactly the example of the kinds of things you need to do to counter the she-cession and turn it into a she-covery. Fact is, the conservatives don't talk about that in their lengthy platform.
And this is why for all those years you saw what they refer to as acts of terrorism. It's literally just the men fighting for their culture, fighting back against the woke mafia. Now, on social media, you'll probably find all these different YouTubers or different social media individuals who are like, this is a travesty, you left behind all these Americans. And I'm like, the people who they left behind are the left, and the left always consumes itself. So I don't feel bad that these individuals got left behind, not in the least, because this is what they're spreading. This is the stuff that they're trying to spread in many of these different countries. And at the very least, the Afghan men put up a fight for 20 years to save their country. And they basically came to the fruition of that today. Now, going back to the article, it goes on to say, it says, yet both within and outside of the US government, it says the white feminists decided that war and occupation were essential to freeing Afghan women. It says notable examples include the Senator Hillary Clinton, who enthusiastically voted for the war, calling it a restoration of hope, and New York Representative Carol Maloney, who wore a blue burqa on the House floor and made an impassioned declaration about how claustrophobic the garment was. The enduring logic was that if they thought military invasion was a good thing, then the Afghan women would too. It says, but groups like the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, a political organization that has denounced religious fundamentalism since its founding in 1977, opposed the U.S. attacks and the U.S.-backed government. Afghan feminists never asked for Meryl Streep help, let alone U.S. airstrikes. The belief that white women knew what's best for Afghan women goes deeper than Hollywood and political posturing. It says the hundreds of millions in development aid that the United States poured into its savior industrial complex relied on second-wave feminist assumption that women's liberation was the automatic consequence of women's participation in capitalistic economy. Now, if you know from history, obviously with the removal of the dollar from the gold standard, which happened back in the 70s, which is around where the movement really started to take off with the push for women into the workplace, is primarily related to needing more debt slaves to pay off the debt, because as you print more money, you now need more taxation to print back the debt, hence the push for women to go into the workplace. Back then, where you could have one income household and the husband could support the whole household, Now it was more mandatory for two individuals to work, and that was primarily due to inflation. As the US economy started to print more dollars, the prices started to rise for both housing and goods, which is one of the reasons why you saw the introduction of the 401k, which was basically a way to kind of stem some of the inflation by telling Americans, if you put money away into the stock market, that you'll get a return, years later, which is one of the reasons why they said you can't take your money out until you retire. So many of these individuals left their money in for decades until they were allowed to, they were met retirement age, and then they were allowed to subsequently take their money out. It's just basically a big scam, one, to hedge inflation so that you had less liquidity that was basically available in the market. Secondly, so that those who created the scam would get in early, right? So hence why they created the scam, so that those individuals would buy in early into the stocks of many popular companies, and then everybody else would basically passively be adding into the stock market via 401k contributions. This is all well thought out. It is not by accident that all of these things were introduced into our way of life. It's just many people were not wise enough to see what was going on at the time, and were not willing to push back and put up a fight like the Afghan men. This is one of the most expensive development programs that Americans brought to Afghanistan was Promote, which cost $418 million and was intended to provide 75,000 Afghan women with training, internships, and jobs. When the program was audited in 2016, it was almost impossible to trace where all the money had gone.
The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
Right, so they were basically robbing the American people under the guise of promoting womanism within Afghanistan culture. So the influx of cash wasn't just wasted. It helped kill indigenous feminism that might have worked to achieve more culturally relevant goals. The aid economy meant that Afghan women activists abandoned their own programs and rushed to American ones. Why? Because that's where the money was. It says white feminism refusal to disaggregate whiteness and its colonialness and its oppressive associations from feminism meant that the blueprint for the empowerment was acting by and large like white women. The result was that those opposing the US presence saw authenticity in rejecting all that came via white feminism. It says, which helped discredit all feminist ideas. White feminism is a trickle-down feminism, and Afghan women are not the only ones it condescends to. Black women, Latino women, and Asian women, and other women of color have trouble gaining entry into policy-making circles because their experience of being a feminist and surviving as a single mother, working on a factory floor, or enduring years of racial discrimination are considered irrelevant. Since those roles go to elite white women who have climbed the ladder, nudging out the very women they allegedly wish to help. Many of the would-be white saviors of Afghan women are now insisting, with the same dogged and willful blindness that led them to support US imperialism in the first place, that the United States should have kept its military in the country to protect Afghan women. But an ill-conceived project cannot be fixed by continuing to make disastrous decisions. The best outcomes could be for white feminists who aided in the destruction of a country to forever forswear such lethal meddling. And this is basically what has gone on. I understand that this is the guise under which many of these groups talk about we're there to free women, we're there to help with women's rights. But the goal is this right here. And that's why it's important to understand the history of the Afghan people. It's important to look back and to see what were the original goals of why American colonialists tried to push their way into Afghanistan.